Welcome back to another edition of Components Breakdown. Today I'm going to take a very brief look at one of White Goblin Games' upcoming releases for the 2011 Spiel Convention entitled Singapore. In Singapore, players act as newly arrived, wealthy merchants on the small, undeveloped island who are attempting to gain their riches through trade and structural development in hopes of turning the outpost into the thriving metropolis that it is today. Singapore is a very simple to play, lighter Euro game with some interesting mechanics that make it a worthy experience for a variety of different gamer types. So let's take a brief look at the game's components and setup. Singapore uses a modular style board system that allows players flexibility in how they wish to initially set up the game board. To begin, players will place the starting tile in the center of the table, adding these 6 land tiles in any configuration next to it, making sure that they all face the same direction and there are no holes between any of these placed lots. The 42 building tiles represent the developments that players will build and utilize throughout the duration of the game, and are randomly sorted into 3 unique groups according to the Roman numerals on their front sides. These 3 stacks are then put together to form one large building stack, with the Roman numeral 1 buildings on top, followed by the 2 and then the 3 buildings. The 4 goods in the games, which are textiles, brick, tea, and opium, along with these street and money markers, are sorted and placed off to the side of the game board, forming the common supply. Also in this location, players will add the provided black bag, which will contain these 16 black and 2 white discs. Now, these colored discs represent the probability of raids taking place throughout the game for those players who choose to participate in the illegal trade of opium. And I will get into this a little bit further in the video when I discuss the gameplay. Each player will then receive a starting stipend of £5, one of their 2 workers, and a set of their lot markers, which will be used to depict which buildings that player builds and owns throughout the course of the game. Each player also has a victory point marker, which will be randomly ordered and placed on the 5 spot of the victory point track, with the player on the bottom becoming the starting player and receiving the Sir Raffles tile. Singapore is played over a series of rounds until there are not enough building tiles to begin another full round, with the winner being the player who has the most number of victory points at the end of the game. The game is actually preceded with what is called a warm-up round, where players take as many building tiles off the top of the building stack as there are players in the game, and in this case 3, placing them in a row next to the game board. Now, in counterclockwise order, starting with the player to the right of the start player, each of these players will take one of the face-up buildings and place it on one of the free or zero-cost lots, marking it with one of their color-coded lot markers and attaching it to any other existing lot with a street. Now, it needs to be noted both here and during the remainder of the game that streets can only be placed orthogonally, or in other words, they can never be placed at a diagonal. When these actions are completed, the real game will now begin, and the flow is actually very simple. So I'll walk you through an example turn. First, at the start of every round, the players will determine who gets the Raffles tile, just as they did at the start of the game, with the tile being awarded to the player who is last on the victory point track. Second, the players will take as many buildings as there are players, plus 1, from the building stack and place them in a row next to the game board. And just as before, these are the buildings that players may choose to build and develop during this particular round of play. Third, the player who is both in last place and holds the Raffles tile will take one color-coded lot marker from each player's supply and distribute them among the available adjacent undeveloped lots as he so chooses. Now, this can become a very powerful ability for the last place player, since they can force more expensive lots on other players and position themselves into highly trafficked areas. Fourth and finally, in clockwise order, starting once again with the player holding the Raffles tile, players will each take their individual actions which require the player to take the following steps. First, they may choose one of the available buildings and place it on the lot containing their color-coded marker, making sure to pay the price that is associated with that particular lot that they were given. If a player is unable to pay for the lot, then they must lose 1 victory point for every 2 pounds that they cannot pay for directly. Second, the player must connect this new building with an adjacent building by placing a new street marker. Third, if the player builds an illegal, dark-bordered building, then they must draw 1 random disc from the black bag. Now, these set up the possibility for what are called raids and are handled as such. If the player draws 1 of the 16 black discs, then they must place that in front of their player's screen to be counted on a further turn. If, however, 1 of the 2 white discs are drawn instead, then a raid's going to take place where every player must reveal all of their yellow opium cubes and black discs, with the player having the most combined having to lose 1 pound per each of these components. Now, after the player builds, they are then allowed to initially place, then move their worker up to 3 steps and use up to 3 different buildings, making sure to follow the paths of the placed streets. Now, this is where a majority of the player's strategies will begin to take shape and formulate throughout the game, because each building provides a completely unique ability. And with new buildings being introduced every round, players will need to adapt and kind of change their initial strategies for gaining victory points to better utilize the new spaces of the game board. What's also very mechanically interesting here is that every time a player chooses to use a building that is marked with another player's lot-colored marker, that owner gains 1 victory point for the player using their lot. So again, as the game board grows throughout the rounds, it becomes increasingly important for players to not only mind what buildings they choose to develop, but also where they choose to place them. And that's really how a round of Singapore takes place. I've had the chance to play Singapore just less than a half dozen times now, and my initial impression of the game was very skewed towards the negative simply because I read and taught the rules incorrectly on my first playthrough, which unfortunately gave my advanced gaming group a very sour opinion about the game. Having played it 3 more times now with a couple of different groups, I've actually flipped my opinion about the game and now feel that this is a very solid, if lighter, Euro-style tile placement game. The buildings are all very self-explanatory and provide a large array of victory point engines to gradually build and take form throughout the game, which does create an atmosphere of creativity and ingenuity. And the rules are simple enough that it is easily explained and set up in just a few short minutes, making it a very good gateway game for newer players. However, there are still a lot of decisions for advanced players to make each and every round, and with a limited capacity to move and utilize only 3 buildings per turn, these types of players may actually experience some AP from time to time when deciding how to route their workers to best maximize each individual action. The only real issue I've had with the gameplay is the somewhat underwhelming feeling of the perceived impact of illegal trade and opium in the game, which never did feel quite as harmful nor rewarding as the description makes us to believe it may be. Yes, opium does trade out at a slightly higher ratio than the other goods in the game, but we've yet to see it make a real, true, and lasting impact on the strategies for amassing large amount of victory points through a variety of other methods besides that. So in other words, opium and illegal trade never felt as powerful nor as devastating as we had hoped they would be. All in all though, this is actually a nicely produced, mechanically sound, if somewhat more lightweight Euro-style game, and although it probably won't set the world on fire, it's definitely worthy of taking a look at when it's released. So that is Singapore. I am Jeremy Salinas, and thank you very much for watching.